Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first instalment of our Modern Data Architecture webinar series. This one will be focusing on data integration. I'm Andy Steed, I'm Content Director of Big Data London. I'm joined today by Mike Ferguson of Intelligent Business Strategies. Say hello, Mike. And Nathaniel Spohn of Fivetran. Hi, Nathaniel. These sessions are designed to be interactive, so please send any questions in during the broadcast, and I'll endeavour to ask as many as I can after each session. I'd also like to flag up the attachments section, which is at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. From there, you can sign up to part 2 and part 3 of this webinar series. Part 2 is on May the 12th. And is focusing on data warehousing, and part 3 is on May the 18th and focusing on data visualization. However, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first presenter. Over to you, Mike Ferguson.
Thanks, Andy. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you may be. I'll just share my screen and get my slides up for you. So here we are. Just put that on full screen. So what I want to talk about today is managed data integration, and what I'm seeing happening in a lot of enterprises to try and get best practice moving within their organization. So what I'd like to cover is kind of, well, what's the vision and the expectation primarily from business? I then want to look at the challenges that we face in trying to make use of all of the data that's potentially available to us, how we've been doing that in the past, which hasn't exactly been optimized, a kind of more of a siloed approach. And, how do we conquer the kind of these challenges and get a more optimal way of managing data integration in order to really accelerate the process and shorten the time to value. Okay, so if I look at any organization today, all I hear from a lot of my clients, at least, is we want to become data driven, and that obviously involves both data and analytics in order to try and achieve the overall expectations of senior executives in the enterprise. And many of them are talking about they're going to disrupt the markets they're in. They're going to completely transform their businesses this way and be able to do so very, very rapidly in order to get major competitive advantage. But if you're going to go do this, you really do need a trusted foundation of data, rock solid data upon which to make these kinds of decisions. And that's beginning to be a challenge. If you look at the urgency around this, there's no question it's already a major issue for companies. You can see here from this survey, which the reference is down at the bottom of the screen, shows back in 2019, there was a massive urgency to invest in data and artificial intelligence. And the focus of, if you look back over the last 3 years, has really jumped to massive investment in cloud computing and machine learning. But if you look at why, well, you can see that the drivers are very much to become more agile, far more competitive, and totally transform business as a result. But at the same time, that exact same survey by New Vantage Partners that was done in 2019 shows that over the last 3 years, the challenge in creating a data-driven organization has got harder. And for many organizations, they're really struggling in creating this data-driven culture. And so looking at it, 71.7% of the firms that were surveyed said they'd yet to forge a data culture, which makes me think of the famous photograph of Peter Drucker, as you can see there, talking about culture will eat strategy for breakfast. If you can't change that, and most organizations saying people are a major issue in terms of their ability and obstacle in achieving data-driven culture. So we've got to convince people that this is worth it. Now, there's no question the demand for data has skyrocketed. We're way beyond the traditional master data and transaction data that you see at the top of your screen there, into many new forms of data, machine-generated data like clickstream, or data coming off of IoT, devices, whether those are consumer devices like the phones in your pocket or the watches on your wrist, or whether they're industrial IoT, such as machines in production lines and pieces of equipment out there in field operations. We've got human-generated data, all of the opinions on social networks, for example, inbound email, even insurance companies now getting video, that's been recorded on dash cams and webcams and whatnot, all coming in. So a lot of data there, as well as external data. And what that's resulted in for many organizations is that they've created an analytical ecosystem that's multiple analytical platforms where they're doing different kinds of analytical workloads. From the more traditional sort of data warehouses on the right, and even copies of data warehouse data for doing data mining off of structured data there, and master data management, to the more kind of evolving streaming analytics, big data, graph analytics, exploratory stuff happening over on the left-hand side. But today, all of this is available on the cloud as well as in the data center. But for most of the clients that I have, we're in a hybrid world, where some of it's in the cloud or multiple clouds, and some of it in the data center. But to date, what we've ended up doing, I think, is creating silos for each of those systems in that analytical ecosystem, with different data integration tools for different platforms and perhaps different teams working in each of these silos. And the big challenge for many organizations is how many tools have they now purchased, whether in the business or in centralized IT, to prepare data. And how many people are writing scripts to do that? How many people are writing Python code or R code as well as the other tools that they've bought? And of course, none of these tools is particularly capable of sharing metadata with any other tools. So people using one tool are unlikely to know what's going on or who's produced what with any other tool. And of course, with so much data now being generated, it's being ingested all over the place into cloud storage, into NoSQL databases, into big data systems like Hadoop, as well as even into traditional staging areas on data warehouses. And the problem with that is it's not particularly well organized. And as a result of that, companies are now dealing with maybe multiple cloud data stores, Hadoop systems, multiple warehouses, etc., and no real idea what exists where, and the quality of data, where the sensitive data is, and so on. So it's pretty hard to govern and find data. And it's not particularly well organized. So it's not surprising, with all of this amount of data coming into all of these different places across this landscape, that we see people kind of overwhelmed by the data complexity that's out there. And today we're also in a world of dealing with what I would call a kind of distributed operating environment. We have data centers, either one or more of those, depending on the size of your organization. We've got multiple clouds. You may be operating on one or multiple clouds already. And so you have systems there and data stores there. And now we have edge computing with various devices, gateway devices out in the edge, also have the ability now to potentially collect and store data out there. So what we've now got is, if you like, a distributed operating environment that we're now using, and so our business is operating across this hybrid distributed environment of edge, multiple clouds, and data center. And so then the challenge is, well, how do you capture, store, integrate, analyze, and even govern everything that's out there? And do you know how you're doing that? Is it consistently done across multiple underlying data centers or across multiple clouds and the edge? And have you got a way to connect to them easily? Also, I think with so many different data sources spread so widely these days, and so many use cases, many businesses are viewing centralized IT as more of a bottleneck who did this job of integrating and transforming and integrating data in the past. And so huge demand for companies with self-service data prep tools in order to want to be able to do this themselves. And so the The concern around that, of course, is that people who are worried about data governance, if everybody's got their own self-service data prep tools, then they could end up with a Wild West situation. And I love this kind of quote, which I picked up from a client, was everyone saying, where they said that everyone was blindly integrating data with no attempt to share what they create. And so that's a crazy situation, where there's a huge amount of potential reinvention going on. And of course, the problem with that is, if you think we had a lot of silos before, we could now be looking at even more personal silos as everyone, reinvents potentially across all of these different tools that may be out there. So the expectation is yet that we're going to be disruptive. We're going to be able to shorten the time to value. We saw that at the very beginning of this presentation, and that all of this is going to make us more agile and more effective. But at the same time, we need to be able to govern it, and they almost look like opposing forces. And so the question then is, well, why can't we have all of it? And so what would you need to do that? Because if you look at the demand here, there's no question people have got issues with data. I mean, this is from the Fourth Industrial Revolution survey report that I put together every year for the Big Data London show. And what you see here is, data quality and data governance absolutely top of the priority list, and data tools top of the priority list, and the skills to use those tools also up there, really dominating the kind of demand. It's not just analytics, it's data management's becoming the big issue here. And of course, so the question is, well, do you want everybody to produce their own book? And the data you want is in there somewhere, but there could be multiple copies of it, or do you want the picture on the left, or do you want a picture on the right, where it's organized and it's easy to find, and there's ready-made stuff that's ready to go, and potentially even other products built on top of trusted ready-made stuff that could be even more valuable. Most of my clients, I think, are wanting the one on the right. But if you want the one on the right, what are the key requirements? Well, we need to get common understanding of data. So we need common data names and definitions, irrespective of which way you want to provision that data, whether it's in a data model in a database, or in JSON format or XML format or whatever. We need to stop the reinvention and get consistent ways to transform and integrate data and clean it up so that we can speed that up. We need a common approach to transforming and integrating data, and common policies to govern it, so that we can produce these trusted, if you like, data services and trusted analytical models that we have the confidence to use across the organization. So that kind of means we need some kind of approach to doing this. We've got to start with, what are we trying to achieve as a business? Maybe it's to improve customer experience, to reduce fraud, or something like that. We've got to then figure out, well, okay, what data management capabilities do we have, and do we need in order to make that business value? And then, look at your maturity and see, well, what are you missing? What do you need? And then what data do you need to help you achieve these goals? Where are the sources? How do you then set yourself up in order to be able to quickly get that data, bring it in, catalog it, and organize teams to produce, sort of data assets that allow you to then use that data to achieve the desired outcomes. In this case, perhaps reducing fraud or improving customer value. Improving customer experience. So one of the key things there, as I mentioned, common data definitions. Absolutely foundational. If we want to share data, everybody has to know what it means, as well as perhaps where it came from. But common definitions are fundamentally important here. We need to define those, because, as I said, if you're going to share it, you have to trust it. If you're going to trust it, you have to know what it means, and you have to know where it came from in order to be able to share it across the enterprise. I think as well, to organize to become data-driven, we need to have producers and consumers. So if we're trying to reduce fraud, or you're trying to improve customer experience, then who's producing the data assets that are going to help you reduce fraud, or that are going to help you improve customer experience. And you know, is that a combination of IT and business working together in order to produce those trusted data assets? And then who's going to consume those and produce what from it in order to really achieve the outcomes that you're trying to achieve? In addition, we have to align, you know, groups of producers in these project teams with specific goals. So as I said, you know, if it is improving customer experience, or you're trying to reduce risk by reducing fraud, then which teams are working on which deliverables in order to achieve those specific goals? And then can you do this on a common set of you know, data management tooling, data fabric, and a catalog and common analytical platform, both of which are extensible, where you can add in things as you go along, but you've got a common approach to doing this, rather than everybody going off and with their own budgets and buying all their own tools. And of course, whatever data management software we put in place to be able to prepare and integrate data, it has to be able to connect to that distributed operating environment that we already spoke about. You need to be able to connect to the edge to pick up streaming data, to connect to data stores in the data center, and to connect to data stores, including cloud storage and other databases that may be stored in various clouds. And build pipelines in order to take that data and be able to produce both trusted data products or data assets and trusted analytical assets, such as predictive models or dashboards or reports that you can then publish for people to pick up and reuse. So those teams that I mentioned, you know, that are tasked with delivering products, if you like, data products or analytical products, are ingesting this data into an organized data lake and using a common ELT kind of extract, load, and transform kind of processing using data fabric to build up those assets, so that we can speed people up rather than getting them to reinvent. We get them to reuse and start to deliver value far more rapidly. So the objective here then is to manage the data integration, to be able to manage the ingestion and the preparation of data and the publishing of data, so that we can make reusable data assets available as a service, so that they are components that people can then pick up and speed up their ability to deliver value much more rapidly, rather than asking them to all go back and start from scratch every single time. And you can see from the survey that we did last year for Big Data London, the data lake's the number one issue in terms of priorities for 2020. So, you know, real signal here that companies are looking to get an organized setup in order to process data. And clearly some key technologies within there, the data catalog, to understand what data is that you're ingesting and where it's held, to be able to manage data ingestion so that you know which data you're bringing in and who brought it in and when. Kind of data fabric to be able to allow people to leverage a common platform to be able to prepare and integrate data and get that supply chain, if you like, going. Analytics to be able to use during the data preparation if necessary, perhaps to filter data or to score it, to convert it from one format, maybe like voice to text, to be able to even do things like sentiment scoring or something like that out of it, or even make recommendations on it. And of course, you know, other aspects to support security and compliance and be able to make it easy to access if it's in multiple places. But in terms of a data lake, could be centralized. What you're seeing here is that could be cloud storage, or it could be a Hadoop system. And those are examples where you bring the data to the center and then process it. Of course, for some companies, there are challenges there. Maybe they've got so much data that they can't move it all to the center. And clearly, if you've got enormous amounts of sensor data, for example, in the IoT world, that could be an example of that. But for other organizations, it may not be the size of data that's the obstacle in getting it to a center, but it could be a legal reason why they can't bring all data to the center. So in some organizations, a centralized data lake storage may not be possible for these kinds of reasons. But the alternative, therefore, is to still create a data lake, but what I would call a logical data lake. That is the ability to be able to allow multiple data stores within a organized data lake to be able to ingest and prepare and publish trusted assets. But in this case, it has to function as if it was centralized, even though it isn't. And so as an example here, you can see organized data stores in different zones, an ingestion zone made up of different data stores, curation zone to stage data in an intermediate step, and then a trusted zone, which again could be multiple data stores, but each of these zones is dedicated to that function, to just ingesting and holding raw data, or for example, to just holding trusted data that's ready made and ready to go. And what you see here is a couple of key elements to this: the catalog along the top and the data fabric, to manage the data preparation and integration consistently across all of this distributed landscape consistently, even though the amount of data may be spread far and wide across that environment. And so looking back at our silos, we can kind of rationalize this, and sort of particularly along the bottom there, those green data management tools boxes can all be potentially consolidated, if you like, or let's rationalize down to a sort of common data fabric, which we can use to manage the integration of data, to give you trusted data that can be provided into one or more analytical systems for different use cases. So everybody's using trusted data sources rather than reinventing it again and again. And so within the context of a cloud, for example, I could ingest the data into a centralized data lake within a cloud, or even a hybrid data lake across multiple clouds, and use a common data fabric to prepare trusted data still in that cloud storage, which could underpin these other systems, and so support multiple use cases off of common trusted assets. And so speed up our ability by reusing things rather than going off and reinventing them again and again. And then we can potentially simplify access to make it easy for business users to come in using data visualization tools to be able to produce the insights that they need from the trusted assets that are potentially available in a catalog or a marketplace. So architecturally, you're kind of looking at something like this, where we're handling both streaming data, we're handling data from internal and external sources coming in, and then a common ELT-based curation process to scale the data integration to produce these trusted assets, which can then be used, as I said, for multiple different use cases, everything from data science through traditional data warehousing to other niche areas around analytics, and even to produce virtual views of that data to stop you copying it all over the place. So this emergence of a data marketplace is happening once we've got these trusted assets, where we can then publish them in a catalog. A marketplace, just a kind of name for a catalog, but the catalog is only showing you trusted data and analytical assets that others can quickly find and that have common definitions and full lineage, and then they can pick these things up and then quickly start delivering value from them rather than starting from scratch again. So whether you're building new reports or dashboards or new virtual views, combining trusted assets to give you something even more valuable, all of those are potentially things that could be created. And once you create them, of course, you could then publish those back into a catalog, as long as you go through a governance process to do that, and then build on top of the trusted assets that you created in the first place. And so over time, you get even more value being reused and published again and again, and speeding people up to drive the value that they need. So I guess what I'm saying here then is that we're managed data integration, if you like, is not just about giving everybody their own budgets in lots of different departments, and letting them go off and buy their own self-service data prep tools and putting raw data in the middle and say, here you are, you figure it out. Absolutely not. I mean, the chances of chaos and reinvention are pretty high if you do that, and also the potential for inconsistency during reinvention means that you could get all kinds of different answers off of potentially the same data with this kind of approach. So we're not saying this. What we are saying, however, is that what we want, if we're going to become data driven, we need to incrementally build up a set of trusted data and analytical assets, which can then be easily found in a marketplace, which people can then pick up and go with in order to drive the value that they need. And even if there are trusted assets, you could even pick those up with self-service data prep and merge them together to create something even more valuable. But the key point being is that all parts of the organization are getting trusted assets out of the box, if you see what I mean. Okay, so that pretty well wraps up my section. So with that, I'll stop sharing and hand over to Andy and Nate again.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, we've had some questions in from the audience. So I'll put those to you first before we move on, if that's okay.
Sure.
First one is, how would the hybrid model work in highly sensitive environment or line of business?
It works as long as you know where your highly sensitive data is, because clearly I think that emphasizes the need to do automatic sensitive data detection in catalogs. And so part of this, I guess, to satisfy that requirement, I think you need the ability to automatically detect where sensitive data is. Then you can set the policies up so that if sensitive data is coming in, you can mask it, on ingest, so that by the time it becomes available, then people who are not authorized to see it aren't going to see it.
Okay. And we've got another one here. Interested to understand what Mike's view on logical data fabric and whether it helps to support the problem or just adds an extra layer of complexity.
Well, I think the logical data fabric is probably relating to the idea of a logical data lake that I was talking about, which could be satisfied in a number of ways. It could be satisfied, obviously, with data integration software being able to connect to the different data sources that are out there, whether those are edge or databases in multiple clouds or on premises. So I think the idea of a logical data fabric is effectively software that can stretch across and connect to the distributed operating environment that I talked about, and give you the ability to then take data from those environments and prepare and integrate it. In the cases where data is too large to move, if in some of those sources, then we want the ability to perhaps push down and integrate the data where it is, leave it there, but still be able to prepare it and then take the results, if you like, of that and move that forward.
Okay, and then we'll have one final one before we move on to Nathaniel's presentation. Does IT have a role here, or is the modern way just a business users doing data integration?
Oh, I think IT has a huge role. I keep seeing this, IT's dead and long live self-service. I think we need a combination of both. And it shouldn't be IT or business. You just should take the walls down, and it's just teams of people collaborating together, some of which are IT pros and some of which are business professionals. So in my opinion, absolutely, they have a role to play. They also have a role to industrialize things that perhaps business have prepared and could maybe take the expertise of an IT professional to scale it up a bit and make it better performing. I think they've got the ability to introduce governance services in order to allow the things that businesses are building to be governed easily. I think they've got the ability to produce templates and things to speed business on their way, so that they're doing so within a governed framework that can be centrally managed from within IT. So I think this is a definite partnership, not a them and us situation.
Okay, perfect. Well, we do have lots more questions for you, Mike.
Okay.
But what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to the next segment, and we'll try and come to some of those questions at the end if we have time, if that's okay with everybody. Just quickly before I welcome our next presenter on, I just wanted to let you know that if there's any part of the Mike's presentation that you want to see again, or any of the whole webinar that you'd like to see again once it's completed, this session will be on demand almost instantly after we've finished. So you can go back and watch any part of it again at your leisure. So next up in the presenter's chair is Nathaniel Spohn from Fivetran, and handing the reins over to you, Nathaniel.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andy. And also thank you, Mike, for the presentation there. And I think in this presentation, I'm going to share how Fivetran's journey so far and the product that we have in addressing some of these concerns. So I think the need for radical data accessibility, everybody's really trying to get access to these data is a key point, but then also the need for standardization of this data so that it's not a mess, that you have all sorts of different people looking for it. And then the other thing that is, I think, an important need that you brought up is also to be able to combine data so that it's not siloed in these different departments and we can get a single understanding of the truth and work together. So I'm going to hop over into my presentation here. So just to start out with a little bit about Fivetran. I joined Fivetran. Currently, I'm the EMEA manager for Fivetran, so I manage our London, Dublin, and Munich office. But I started at Fivetran 3.5 years ago in San Francisco when we were only 7 people in a small little office downtown. And what really inspired me was the vision of our CEO and founder, which was to make data accessibility as simple and reliable as electricity. And if you think back in history, kind of at the advent of electricity, it's kind of an apt analogy. In the beginning, it was really hard to standardize like the voltage and the frequency with which electricity came forward. You'd have outages. It was hard to make standard electricity work with different applications. But over time, with a lot of complicated work in the background, we were able to supply electricity that just worked and is consistent. And from that, all sorts of different uses of electricity proliferated. You started out with light bulbs, but then you go to your dishwasher, and even now we have the advent of electric cars. And so I think this vision has served us very well in a journey from when I started, probably around 70 customers, to over 1,000 customers globally now. We sync about 2 trillion rows of data per month. We're part of Deloitte's Fast 500 companies. We're one of the fastest 30 tech companies, according to NASDAQ. We're in Y Combinator's top company list, and we're tied for the best place to work for cloud computing companies. And one thing that I think also inspired me quite recently, Andreessen Horowitz is the VC firm that led our last round, and the partner from Andreessen Horowitz that spoke to us, he has a theory that in the past, a lot of the tech giants that have grown and been very successful companies were those that had really good code. So you can think of Google with its search engine, had the best code, it was the most optimized search engine. But his theory is that into the future, it's going to be companies that can best leverage data, that can best take the most advantage and become data-driven companies that are going to have a big, significant competitive advantage going forward. And there's a study from Forrester that kind of further shows that this is already starting to happen. 178%. If you are a data-driven business, you're 178% more likely to have growth with your revenue. You're 240 times more likely to have a competitive advantage. And they say that data-driven companies are going to take $1.8 trillion away from their competitors by 2021. You can also see the incredible proliferation of SaaS applications and all of the data that is stored in there. Companies that are 0 to 250 on average have 75 SaaS applications that they use. Companies that are 250 to 500 employees have 123 SaaS applications that they use. And then companies 500 to 1,000 have 200 plus, and it probably goes up from there. And similar to this point that Mike alluded to, oftentimes making use of this data, and also data from databases, file storage, event data, is siloed, and different departments are trying to handle it in different ways. So you might have marketing using custom code to try and get an understanding of their advertising data, sales, keeping it all within Salesforce, finance using CSV files. And it can lead to this scenario where there isn't a common understanding of the truth. You're not able to join data and have a common view of how all of the different functions within your business are working together. So the vision of the modern data stack is really to provide a complete view of your data for your insights, to have performance where anybody within your organization could get the answers to the questions that they need rapidly, without any issue in terms of bringing those results forward, and for it to be accurate, a single source of truth that everyone is aligned to throughout the organization. If we take this further, kind of the current approach that many organizations take is you'll be pulling data from your different data sources, and then you're going to audit it for completeness of your data. I'm just going to see if I can go into full presenter mode here. Then you usually go through a data cleaning process, which is quite cumbersome. Then you'll go into data modeling. Then you'll go into validating the data for correctness, and finally you store it in the warehouse. But once you've done all of that work, there's still schema changes that happen. So columns can be added to tables, or broader schema changes with new tables get added in. There's incremental loads of data. There's failure recovery from syncs that didn't work. And teams often spend 40% of their time on average, once they've got this data ingestion set up, just maintaining that solution. And so, what I think people are really looking for in the modern data stack is accurate syncs. They want reliable data. They can go on vacation. They can do whatever they need to do. They know that data is showing up. They also want high availability. So if there's, they don't want any downtime, and they want completeness of data. Fast access. So if there are new data sources that you want to get access to, you don't want to have to wait for a 2-month integration project to have that data available, or a 2-year integration project. It's great if it's available immediately. You want to auto detect schema changes so that they're immediately available and the data just works, but at the same time it's standardized so that you have a consistent way of looking at your data and your reports work. You want your transformations to be really effective, to work post-load once the data is in the destination. Completeness of data. So instead of only pulling over a few tables that you need for the current reports, having all your data accessible to you so you can have much more agile analytics. You also want zero maintenance so that the connections just work and there's no development required, and that the connectors are pre-built so that there is a standardized way that data is delivered for your different data sources, especially SaaS applications, but also for your databases and file storage going forward. And so this is what Fivetran is delivering. We have 150 pre-built connectors to all sorts of different data sources. We have fully accurate synchronization of the data, so there aren't going to be data integrity issues. There's in-warehouse transformation, so if you need to do further things with your data warehouse, you can. It's also analysis-ready schemas. So the data that we deliver from SaaS applications is not simply kind of a normalized view of what you would get from the API. It's a well thought through schema that's particularly designed to make the best use of that data. And that means there's a common language with how the data is distributed, and it's consistent across all the data sources that you're loading in. There's also automatic schema migration. So if new tables are added, you can have them come in automatically, or you can monitor that for security reasons. Similarly, if columns are added or data types are changed, you can handle those as well. Yeah, and another thing that's really important is change data capture. So looking through how your data has changed over time so that you can look back historically and know what the changes are. 99.9% SLA, so the data is all available, and a fully managed service. I think it's really important that people are very strategic in how their data is delivered, but we want you as focused as possible on the high value downstream activities. So this is a list of all of the pre-built connectors that Fivetran supports, and we're adding new ones every single day. And this is the main sort of data stack that we would participate in. You'd have hundreds of different data sources that you have across your whole organization that often would be siloed, and we would connect to those, extract and replicate that data into your data warehouse, data lake, and then within there, we're going to deliver these ready-made schemas so that they're predefined, they're well documented on our doc site, you know exactly where the data is, and you have access to all of the data. And then within the data warehouse, you can do optional SQL-based transformations, and then you have really complete access to that data within your BI tool or with other things that you're using the data, be that ML, AI. So from here, I'm going to hop over into Fivetran itself and show you what the product looks like. So you can kind of see a little bit underneath the hood. The first thing that you do when you come to Fivetran is connect your data warehouse. So that could be Snowflake, and you would connect it in there. As soon as it's connected, which is a very straightforward process, you come into your Fivetran account. And let's say I wanted to bring in my Salesforce data. All you have to do is click on this connector button, and you'll see a huge library of all of the different data sources that we support. So you can go into the top and put in Salesforce, click on this here, and this is going to bring you to a connector. Now, I'm already logged into Salesforce through Okta, so I'm going to create a random unique schema name. This would be the folder that all of the Salesforce is going to come into, and then I authorize it. And what we're doing here is we're connecting to Salesforce, making sure that the username and credentials is all secure. Now I'm going to save and test that. And so here we're pulling all of the schema information, all the standard and custom objects that are in Salesforce, and getting ready to display those in Fivetran so that you can very easily decide what data you want to bring over. Now, if we view the connector itself, what we're going to see in here is all of the standard and custom objects within this Salesforce. And what we could do is just unpause this connector and immediately sync all of this data into whatever the data destination, the data warehouse is that you want. But you may also have security concerns. This was brought up before. What if you have sensitive data? Here you can block particular tables, but you can also drop down into these tables, and you can either decide to hash and mask particular columns, or you can block the columns entirely. And that way you can be really sure that all the data that is going to be delivered into your data warehouse is the data that should be there, and you can handle any of the security concerns that you might have. One other thing that is really helpful with Fivetran is you can decide how frequently you want the newer change data to come over. So if you want newer change data to come over every 5 minutes, you set it here. We can go actually as low as every 1 minute or every 6 hours. This would be after that initial historical sync has happened. Here, once the data is syncing, you're going to get a complete set of logs that's going to tell you everything that's happening, how quickly the data is coming over. And you can also come into this status bar where you can see all of the successful syncs. If there's any issues, you can see them here, and you'll get stats. So you'll be able to notice, for instance, that there was 36 schema changes in the last 10 days, and those were all schema changes that you might have had to deal with manually in another scenario. And so, yeah, this is kind of the overview of Fivetran. We have our transformation tool. You can connect log reading services to Fivetran. We have a very robust doc section, which gives you a full overview of all of the schemas that we deliver for our SaaS applications, and then also how we support and standardize the data that's delivered for databases, files, events, and other types of sources. So I'll pop back out over here and over to the demo. I want to share a use case, which I think is one of the most powerful examples of a shift in culture to become data-driven. MVF is a UK customer of ours. Their main focus is to generate leads for other companies, for other clients. And they did a project with us where they, fairly quickly implemented Fivetran. They brought all of their data into Snowflake. They set up Looker on top of Snowflake, which does a really good job of helping to reinforce a single understanding of the truth, and then set it up so that business users can access that data incredibly quickly. And what happened with MVF is that the people in the call centers who were calling all of these companies to get leads to then hand over to other companies, they realized that a lot of the leads that they were getting were being rejected by the particular client they were getting the leads for, but then a couple weeks later or a month later, they might be the perfect lead for another client. And so they were thinking, could we make more use of this? Could we repurpose these leads and sell them? And so they used Looker to set up all the dashboards to be able to understand these leads that were coming in and understand the clients that were coming in. And they were effectively able to repurpose a lot of these leads, and it actually increased their revenue from 3,000 or 300,000 a month to 700,000 a month, simply by this innovation that was actualized and initiated by people in the call center. And so I think this is a really powerful example when you have a data-driven culture, the shifts and the real monetary impact that it can have. So yeah, in summary, we're here to help. If you'd love to learn more, I think the whole team, we have about 50 people here in Europe, and we're really driven by just helping people and by digging into the problems that you have and understanding them further. And so feel free to reach out to us, start a free trial, play around with our tool. It's dead simple, easy to use. You can get data immediately, as you saw. So that's kind of it from the Fivetran side. Thank you so much, and I'll pass it back to Andy for questions.
Thanks, Nate. Thanks, Nate. I can see you both now. Brilliant. Yeah, we have a couple of questions for you following that, if that's okay. I'll start with a nice, easy one. What's the difference between Fivetran and other data pipeline tools out there?
Yeah, so Fivetran really focuses on bringing over all the data that is available from a particular data source and making sure that it's delivered in a consistent way. So there are other fully automated data pipelines, but they don't have complete pre-built schemas that are incredibly well thought through in terms of how that data is delivered. And then, while some tools focus on really having to define what data you want to bring over in advance, we focus a lot on just allowing you to bring over all of the data so that it's immediately accessible, which will drive more agile analytics down the line.
Okay. Somebody here asking, do you provide a test drive for Fivetran? There's a link to your website, isn't there, on the attachments? I'm presuming people can go in there and find what they need. Would that be fair?
Yeah, it's just fivetran.com, and right on the first page you can either request a demo to talk to somebody or spin up a free trial to play around with it.
Perfect. Thank you for the question. How do you manage high data throughputs?
Great question. So a lot of those high data throughputs, they could be from different sources. So pretty much any application, a SaaS application, the data throughput isn't really high enough to be a challenge. Even things like Google 360 that has high levels of event data, we're able to handle that no problem. If you take databases, all of our connections to databases have log-based replication. So instead of querying that database over and over again and putting a load on it, we're just reading the logs that are saying what the changes are between the master and the replica. And because we're able to read a complete list of all of those changes, it's incredibly efficient for us to pull over those changes. And so, very large enterprise companies with production databases, we're still able to replicate the newer change data at a pretty high frequency. I would say, the one challenge that you might have is massive event streams of data that have absolutely high volumes. I think if you're getting, into the 10 terabytes a day, Fivetran might not yet be the right solution. Give us a year. But if you're dealing with a smaller amount, we can handle incredibly high volumes of data.
Okay. There's a lot of questions have rolled in for you, Nate. So how can Fivetran bridge the gap between the source and enterprise models? Does that
The source and enterprise models?
Yes. Do they mean open source and enterprise models?
Oh, open source and enterprise models. Interesting. So Fivetran, I guess Fivetran has pre-built connectors for a lot of our SaaS applications that we bring over. Those are published, but they're proprietary. We also have a tool through Functions where you can build your own connector, so you can use that. We also have a very strong partnership with DBT integrated into our platform. Now that's an open source transformation tool, so we made a strong partnership with them in order to enable best-in-class transformations within your data warehouse. And our the philosophy of Fivetran, in order to be just work universally for everybody and have the data standardized, that's something that we only is owned by all of our customers as well, and we're only able to improve that and build that by that feedback that we get.
Okay, oh, that's great. A lot of the questions are quite specific about connectivity between individual vendors and things like that. I think that it might be worthwhile some of these asking directly to your website, in terms of, it sounds like that they're interested in very particular queries in terms of their own architecture.
You go to fivetran.com/docs. You'll see a pretty complete list of all of our current connectors and how the data is delivered. So that's a great place to look initially. And then if the sources aren't supported there, I would say reach out to us, and we can, we may very well have a solution for it.
Perfect. I think that's sensible, rather than me asking you a series of questions about particular instances there. I'm going to flip to you now, Mike, if that's okay.
Sure.
We had a few questions come in after our question session, and I just wanted to put a few of those ones to you. How do you make the choice between Data Fabric and Data Hub technology? Is that...
Okay, well, I mean, generally a data fabric is the software that is controlling the ingestion, discovery, cataloging, etc., and integration, preparation and integration of data to be published. A data hub typically would be a physical data store in which data could be potentially published into. And could be, I suppose, in the context of the trusted zone in a logical data model, you could effectively say that having got your trusted assets sitting in multiple data stores, as long as there's a catalog acting as a marketplace to let you know where these assets are, you could hide the physical location of where they actually happen to be stored. And so could potentially facilitate a data hub capability there. I mean, the purpose of a data hub implies a hub and spoke architecture where you publish into a hub and then other subscribers could potentially then get it. What you would like to try and do with preparing data once and using it everywhere, however, is not to have everybody give you a copy of that data, because if you then do that, you could potentially lose control of where all that data went and be back in a Wild West situation again. And so you'd have to catalog copies going out into the, into the ether, if you like, if you were going to do that, which is why, sometimes data virtualization technology can solve that problem, because you don't have to physically distribute the data in order to be able to access it. So I think hubs are, a data fabric can be used in order to create a data hub, but I don't think it's an either or question.
Okay. And sticking on data fabric, it's what challenges would exist if the components of the data fabric are from multiple technology stacks?
Well, the biggest challenge is metadata sharing across those technologies, because there's no industry standard to share metadata. The assumption is that these things will snap together like Lego bricks. Well, I think you're going to be wildly disappointed if that's the case, because that would require the vendors of whatever combination of technologies you've got to have already got some kind of joint development going on. I mean, the idea, or the alternative is that there is a possible emerging standard called ODPI Algeria, which some vendors are a member of. There's also metadata connectors available from a firm called Meta Integration Technologies, Inc., which a lot of vendors often embed in their software to give them access to other tool metadata. But it's going to depend entirely on which combination of technologies you have. But if you are assuming that the technologies that you have are just going to snap together and work together, you're going to be sorely disappointed.
And there's a question here about the survey results that you showed in your slides, and it's questioning why, if it's proven that there's such a great return from being data driven, why in the data does it seem to suggest that a large percent of businesses aren't adopting these data strategies? What would be your opinion there? Because obviously, if the results are, if the results are self-explanatory, why are people struggling? Why are people not doing it?
Well, I think there's a couple of issues here. I think I said at the beginning, culture is an issue, and if you can't convince people to do this, then the adoption enterprise-wide is hindered, and so there's a massive issue on selling the idea of building data assets across the enterprise to save you time. The assumption is that if you just go out and buy your own tools, you can be agile. But what I've seen over the past several years is that companies that do that tend to reinvent enormously and end up spending, overspending on data preparation, integration, and can end up showing inconsistent results out of it, which will frustrate the people funding those kind of tools, because clearly they didn't expect to end up with mass inconsistency. I think the challenge here isn't so much the technologies, it's the organizing of people, which is the biggest challenge. And if people refuse to cooperate, then organizing so that people know which component they're building is a massive problem, which has got nothing to do with technology.
Okay. And I was actually going to pose, a similar or same question to you, Nate, in terms of your experience. Is there something that's holding people back? Kind of building these solutions that ultimately are going to produce excellent results for them?
Yeah, I think a lot of the historical solutions were built at a time when data storage, where it was more limited in terms of the data that you could centralize and analyze. And so we've had scenarios where a project normally could take 2 years with 3 people and $300K worth of software, and we've been able to accomplish it in a couple of weeks or a week in terms of getting that data centralized. And so a lot of times, we were only a 7-person company 3 years ago. So this is one of the data space in general is one of the fastest evolving spaces that there is. And so, and we're not there yet. It's not, we'll probably look back at today 5 or 10 years ago, and it'll look, like it was just the infancy of what is able to be created. So I would say really stay on top of the cutting edge technologies, and it can be a lot easier than you would have previously anticipated. One quick question just on that data source. I'm just noting SAP HANA or ERP. We're just launching that right now. Whoever asked that question, and we're also putting a big focus on other HANA products or SAP products. So please message us directly if that's it.
Well, it leaves it to me now really to wrap things up here. Like I mentioned right at the beginning of this presentation, This is a 3-part series. I've really enjoyed today, but you can join part 2 and part 3. Links are in the attachments or on our Bright Talk channel, and they will be covering data warehousing and data visualization, 12th and 18th of May. I'd also like to say a massive thank you to Nate and Mike for 2 great presentations and their answers to what was an absolute tsunami of questions in the end. So thanks everybody for being so involved and so engaged and sending through the questions. Apologies to anybody whose question we didn't get round to, but it's time now for us to say goodbye and see you on the next one. Okay, thanks very much. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.